Hello, welcome to today's session. Today we will be talking about the various parts of the brain. In the previous class, we have already talked about the development of human brain, the development from the embryonic stages. So today we will be discussing the classification for brain. As we know, there are three basic parts. We classify it as forebrain, hindbrain, and midbrain. Okay. So these three basic parts of the brain. As we can see here, most of the area, that's 90% of the brain, is covered under forebrain. Then you have midbrain, which is this region, and hindbrain located towards the back portion of the brain. Now, this whole brain is covered under a protective layer, which is known as cranium. Inside cranium, you have meninges, which are located towards the inner side of the brain. Okay. Then whole of the cerebrum region or the cortex of the brain has depressions and ridges. Okay. So there are ridges and there are depressions. The basic reason for this is to increase the surface area of the brain. Okay. So the ridges are known as gyrus, and the depressions are known as sulcus. And this whole process of grooves and ridges, which is found in cortex, is classified under corticalization. Okay. Now, midbrain, pons, and medulla. These three together are known as the brainstem. Okay, so you have these three parts which are known as brainstem, but basically pons and medulla are part of hindbrain. Okay, so in the next slide we will be understanding which all are classified under which parts. Okay, so let me just remove this. So you have the basic classification of brain, which is mentioned here. Okay. As we studied in the diagram before, you have forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. Okay. So hindbrain includes medulla, pons, and cerebellum. Then you have the midbrain and forebrain. Forebrain again includes cortex, basal ganglia, and limbic system. Under limbic system, we have 5 parts, that is thalamus, hypothalamus, hippocampus, amygdala, and cingulate cortex. Under cortex, you have 4 lobes, that is occipital, parietal, frontal, and temporal lobes. So we will be understanding each of the parts one by one. So let's start with the hindbrain. Okay. So under hindbrain, as we said, we talk about medulla, pons, and cerebellum. So pons is a kind of relay mechanism which tries to send messages between cerebellum and cortex. Okay. So pons is basically a kind of intermediary system, okay, that sends or relays messages to and from cerebellum and cortex. Now let's come on to medulla. Medulla is an important part of the brain which basically follows with activities like heart rate, swallowing, then you have breathing. Okay. The most important part of medulla here is you have sensory nerves that cross over. What does this mean? The left part of the body, the information goes to the right brain, and for the right part of the body, the information goes to the left part of the brain. So the sensory nerves get crossover in medulla. Okay. And finally, you have the cerebellum. Cerebellum deals with balancing and coordination. So the main function of cerebellum is balancing and coordination. Now, under brain, when we study, there is an important part that is known as RAS or reticular formations. We call it RF or reticular formations. Now what is RF or RAS? That is the reticular formations. These go from hindbrain to midbrain and finally to cortex. Okay. So this RAS is an important part. Any deviation in RAS can lead to either hyperactivity disorder or attention deficit disorder. So in case if RF or reticular formations are destroyed, a person can go into coma. Okay. So these are the main parts that govern kind of information that is coming into the brain. A best example to understand reticular formation is supposedly if you are standing somewhere and you are hearing a constant noise. Okay. Your brain would have a tendency to ignore that constant noise, but if there is a sudden bang, you would definitely pay attention to that noise. Okay, so that is what is articulated by RF or we call it reticular formations. This is also called as reticular articulating system. Reticular articulating system. Okay, so this is what is RAS. Okay, so under hindbrain we cover medulla, pons and cerebellum. We have talked about the major points on all of these. Okay. Now, damage to cerebellum is very important. Since cerebellum is an organ that deals with balancing and coordination of the body, any damage to cerebellum can lead to spinocerebellar damage, okay, or a kind of degeneration. So we call it spinocerebellar degeneration. So damage to cerebellum can lead to spinocerebellum degenerations. Okay, so there can be kind of dizziness, muscle weakness, unsteady walking. Okay, then as we said, together medulla, pons and midbrain form the brainstem. Okay, then we have midbrain. Midbrain basically do two major functions, that is sensory and motor functions. Okay. Now let's move on to forebrain. Forebrain is classified into three parts: limbic system, basal ganglia and cortex. So let's first discuss or talk about basal ganglia. So basal ganglia is important or majorly deals with retrieval of procedural memory. Okay. So you have basal ganglia. The main aim is retrieving procedural memory. So you have cognitions and voluntary movement that are governed. You have cognitions, voluntary movements that are governed by basal ganglia, and it's a kind of cluster of structures with a lot of axons. Okay, and damage to basal ganglia can lead to two major diseases which are known as Parkinson's and Huntington's. Okay. So these two are the major disorders that are caused due to damage to basal ganglia. Okay. Then we will be talking about limbic system and the cortex. So limbic system, as we talked about, has 5 major components. We'll move on to the next slide where we will be understanding the parts of limbic system. So we'll be talking about all these parts one by one and the major functions that these parts do. Next slide here. Okay. So these are all the parts of limbic system that are explained. So here you have the thalamus. Okay. Now what's the main role of the thalamus? Thalamus is important for the incoming information. Okay. And it transfers that incoming information to the cerebral cortex. So it basically acts as a relay channel and transfers information to cerebral cortex. So that's the main function of thalamus. Okay. Very important point to note here is damage to thalamus can lead to loss of any or all sensations. Okay, it's very important. Damage to thalamus can lead to loss of any or all sensations except. So you have except. Which sense? It's the sense of olfaction or smell. So except this, a damage to thalamus can lead to damage in any or all sensations in the body. Okay, next is hypothalamus. It's located just below the thalamus. It's a kind of very small part in the brain. Okay, the main functions it's responsible for is body thirst. Okay, that's a very important part of hypothalamus. It's related to hunger. It's related to sleep. Okay, so these are the main functions that's performed by hypothalamus. Okay, under hypothalamus, you try to control the pituitary regulations. Okay, so you have the endocrine regulations that are controlled under hypothalamus. Then you have hippocampus. Okay, this part, okay, it's called as hippocampus. It's important because it releases a neurotransmitter that is ACH, acetylcholine. Okay, low amount of acetylcholine can lead to disorders which is known as Alzheimer's. Okay. So hippocampus, the primary function is release of ACH. Then under hippocampus you have, since it's located near the medial temporal lobe, so we will be understanding the lobes. The temporal lobe is one which touches the temples, that's behind the ear, this portion. Okay, so the location would be towards the medial part of the temporal lobe. Okay, it releases acetylcholine as we said, and lack of or low levels of ACH can lead to Alzheimer's. That's again important. Then you have, it's very helpful in forming kind of long term memories which are known as declarative memories. Okay. That's a major function of hippocampus. Then you have amygdala. It's a kind of almond shape in structure. So as you can see, it's a very small structure here of the shape of almond. Okay, it's known as amygdala. It's located near hippocampus. It's important in formation of emotional memories. So it helps to form emotional memories. Okay. Then you have amygdala is basically an organ that tries to induce fear. Okay. So if there is any damage to amygdala, there would be no fear response. Okay. So damage to amygdala would be no fear response. Okay, and this no fear response is known as clover bug syndrome. Okay, so you have clover bug syndrome. Okay, so that is what is about amygdala. Okay, and the last part that we will be talking about is cingulate gyrus. We also call the portion of cingulate gyrus which is around the corpus callosum. It is also includes the cingulate cortex. Okay, so cingulate cortex includes the cingulate gyrus and the region of about the corpus callosum. Okay, the main part is formation of four regions. That's emotional system. Then you have the sensation, recognition of written words. So you would be able to recognize the written words. Then you have emotions. Then you have the feeling of sensations. Okay, so it mainly deals with emotion, sensation, and also there are four parts. One is written words, emotions, sensations, and the last is working memory. So these are the major functions of cingulate cortex, which includes cingulate gyrus. Okay. So with this we cover the major parts of the limbic system. So when we talk about limbic system, as we say, just a fast repetition of what we have done. It's thalamus, hypothalamus, amygdala, hippocampus, and cingulate cortex. Cingulate cortex, as we said, it has 4 basic regions or working areas. So it's written towards emotion, sensations, and working memory. Then under thalamus, it basically deals with relay of information to cerebral cortex. A damage to thalamus can lead to damage to any and all sensations except the olfactory or the sense of smell. Okay. Hypothalamus is the main part which deals with thirst, hunger, and sleep. Damage to hippocampus can lead to kind of Alzheimer's. If the acetylcholine level is low, ACH neurotransmitters is low, okay, and it's helpful in formation of long declarative memories. Amygdala basically induces fear responses. It's important for emotional memories. A damage to amygdala can induce a situation where a person does not have any fear about anything, and this kind of syndrome is known as Kluver-Buck syndrome. Okay. The next part that we would be covering is the parts of the forebrain which are covered under cortex. So let me move to the previous slide. Okay. So here you have the basal ganglia, limbic system that we have already covered, the basal ganglia that we have already talked about. Now we will move on to the final part of the forebrain, that is cortex. Now cortex includes 4 parts. You have occipital, temporal, parietal, and frontal. Now there is a very simple demonstration to understand these parts. If I am standing here, if I am putting my hand on the front of my head, this region which I am covering is the frontal lobe. Towards the temples or the back of the ears is the temporal lobe. Okay. The back side that can be covered is the occipital, and the remaining section here would be the parietal lobe. Most of the students get confused while understanding which section includes what areas. Okay. So it's very important to be very clear about the various lobes of the cortex. Okay. So now we will be talking about the lobes one by one. The first we would be discussing is the occipital lobe. Now occipital lobe includes 2 basic areas, that is visual cortex and the visual association area. Okay. So under occipital lobe you have 2 things, that is visual cortex and visual association area, and occipital lobe, the main function is vision or seeing something. Okay. If there is a damage to the occipital lobe, what would happen? A person would not be able to recognize something while seeing it. So this there is a very famous example on the patient known as Oliver Sacks. Okay. What happened basically was this patient had a damage in the occipital lobe, okay, and he was given a rose in the hand. This patient could not recognize that this is a rose, but because only the vision sense was damaged, the person could smell it and say that the thing that is in my hand is rose. Okay, so that was an experiment done, or kind of experiment which was aimed to prove the role of occipital lobes. Okay, then you have the frontal lobe. Frontal lobe is the most important lobe of the brain. It governs most of the functions. So you have executive functions, thinking, planning, organization, kind of problem solving activities, emotions, behavioral control, and personality. Okay. Also, there is one speech center here which is known as Broca's area. Okay. There are 2 speech centers. One is known as Broca's area and other is known as Wernicke's. So Broca is located in the frontal lobe. Broca is responsible for production of speech. So damage to Broca's area would lead to a disease which is known as Broca aphasia. Okay. And under this, the person would not be able to pronounce or produce the words correctly. For example, if the person wants to say the word clock, okay, rather than saying the word clock, the person would say cot or some other thing. Okay, so that's the kind of problem with production of the speech, and this disorder is known as Broca aphasia. Broca's area, it deals with producing speech and is found at the frontal lobe. Besides that, the other functions as we talked about are planning, organizing, problem solving, dealing with emotions. Okay, so if there is any damage to frontal lobe, what would happen? There would be a risk of motor and like the person would not be able to do the motor functions or the task associated with motor functions correctly. Okay, so if there is a damage to frontal lobe, this would be the main risk that a person would have to face. Okay, now next is under frontal lobe you have a lot of parts. We call it prefrontal lobes, orbitofrontal lobes. Okay, then you have the sensory frontal lobes. Okay, so these are various parts of the frontal lobe. Besides these four lobes, there are two areas in the brain that are demarcated as motor cortex and sensory cortex. Motor cortex deals with the movement or the voluntary movement of the muscles, basically the voluntary movement, and then you have sensory cortex that deals with all kind of sensations that appear in the body. The next is the parietal lobe. Okay, the parietal lobe, which we said is somewhere here. Okay, it's a kind of somatosensory cortex. Okay, so it deals with perception, making sense around the world, trying to solve arithmetic or mathematical problems, and focusing on spellings. Okay, so that is what is the main function of parietal lobe. It also helps in the sensations of touch, temperature, and body positions. Okay, so that is the main function of the parietal lobe, and above it, it tries to receive a lot of information, and as we said, there is a arithmetic center, so it tries to solve a lot of problems. The last here is the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe basically deals with two parts, as we have the visual cortex and visual association area here, and the temporal lobe you have the auditory cortex and you have the auditory association area. Okay, so this temporal lobe basically deals with hearing activities or what you can hear. Besides that, it also deals with memory, understanding and language. Since it deals with understanding, there is another part or another basic area that is found in temporal lobe, and that area is known as Wernicke's area. So just mention it here. You have the Wernicke area. Okay. And what does this Wernicke area do? It tries to understand the meaning of the word. As we said, this lobe deals with memory, understanding and language. So this tries to understand the meaning of certain words. Okay. So if there is a kind of damage to this part, that is known as Wernicke's aphasia. Okay. So again you have, I mentioned it here. Okay. You have Wernicke's aphasia. And what would happen in Wernicke's aphasia is, you would have a kind of right idea but wrong words to explain it. So you will have right idea in your mind, but the words you are using to express that, okay, would be incorrect. So you would be using wrong set of words to explain that idea. So that is known as Wernicke's aphasia. So you would be speaking fluently, but what you would be speaking would not be having some meaning kind of thing. Okay. So the words or the production of speech would be smooth or fluent, in contrast to Broca aphasia. Okay. or broca area that deals with production of speech, where the fluency of the words is not there. Okay. In one-eyed aphasia, there would be fluency of words, but the statement that you would be saying would be giving incorrect meaning, or you won't be able to understand what is exactly explained. Okay. So this is the final slide that we will be covering today. So here are the various lobes of the brain that are explained and the various functions that are covered under the lobes of the brain. So under parts of the brain, there are the major questions basically are focused on cerebellum. That's the most important. Then you have questions on basal ganglia. You have questions on RAS, reticular articulating system. Then a lot of questions are focused on the lobes of the brain or the cortex. Okay. So this is the one marked in the red is the frontal lobe. So under frontal lobe you have the center for the speech, which we have already studied is the broca area. You have the sense for smell. You have the center for concentration, planning and problem solving activities and motor control. Okay. The next here is in the green you have the temporal lobe. So this whole area, the two major functions are hearing and face recognition. So hearing and face recognition are covered under temporal lobe. Okay. Then you have the occipital lobe towards the back side, which mainly deals with vision. Okay. And finally, the parietal lobe. Under parietal lobe, you have the various parts here. Okay. You have touch and pressure. There are sensations of taste. You have body awareness. Now, it's very important. Kind of language and reading is covered under all both of these. You have the temporal and the parietal lobe. But under temporal lobe, this region is basically covered as one-eyed area, which is very important. And we also covered there are two basic parts. You have the motor cortex and the sensory cortex, which covers the voluntary movements and the sensations. So the sensations covered here are touch and pressure and taste. Okay. And the motor cortex covers here is the movement of voluntary muscles and the motor control. So with this, we covered the various parts of the brain. We'll continue with the physiology section in psychology, and we'll be also covering the